Dear participants, welcome back to the second part of the first module. In this subchapter, we will deal with the criticism on the most popular sustainability concepts. As always, let's start with what is covered in this subchapter. After completion, you will be able to outline the critical arguments against the three-pillar model. You will also be able to discuss the understanding of the term sustainable development and the inferences of the Brundtland report. Finally, you will be able to explain the relationship between sustainability and the financial world. Let's start off with a simple question. What does it mean if something is sustainable? Sustainability is often called for, but many people are unclear exactly what it means. Due to the three-pillar model of social, ecological, and economic sustainability, the definition has lost an enormous amount of meaning. What is the criticism of the model, and why is it not suitable for promoting sustainable development? One definition that has become widespread is the three-pillar model. It was presented in 1998 in the final report of the Enquete Commission of the German Bundestag. Three dimensions were defined to capture sustainability: ecological, social, and economic sustainability. Action goals in all three dimensions are intended to ensure that today's society does not live at the expense of its grandchildren and great-grandchildren. This includes, for ecological sustainability, the renewable resources should not only be exploited to the extent that they can be replenished. It also includes that non-renewable resources should only be consumed to the extent that they can be replaced by renewable resources at the same time. What's also integrated is the pollution and greenhouse gas emissions should be within the absorption capacity of the environmental media. And lastly, the hazards to human health from anthropogenic impacts should be avoided. When it comes to economic sustainability, it includes personal initiatives that should be encouraged. It's also encouraged that self-interest should be put at the service of the common good, and prices should have a steering function in the market. This means that they should reflect the scarcity of resources, things, production factors, goods and services. Furthermore, competition should be organized in such a way that functioning markets are created which ensure adaptation to future requirements through innovation. And finally, the economic performance of a society should be increased qualitatively and quantitatively, or at least kept constant. When it comes to the social sustainability aspect, human dignity and personal development for present and future generations should be focused on. Every member of society should receive benefits from the social security system, of course according to contributions made or according to their needs. All three dimensions of this model of sustainability have weaknesses. In general, the formulations are imprecise, which makes it difficult to derive concrete possibilities for actions from the model. It also remains unclear how the change of our society through sustainable development can be achieved. In the following, we will pick out certain criticisms and examine them in more detail. The three dimensions are presented as being of equal importance. Although the theory assumes that they should be viewed integratively, the pillars build on each other, for without an intact nature, our society is not possible. Only it provides us with vital elements, such as clean air, drinking water, and fertile soil for agriculture. Economics is the organization of how we use these resources to produce goods and distribute them. For this reason, various models have been derived, such as the weighted three-pillar model, the one-pillar model, or the sustainability pyramid. Science still disagrees on how resilient the environmental media actually are. The complex system with interdependencies is not yet fully understood. For this reason, resilience limits are more conjecture than established facts. Important key points in the climate change are the so-called tipping points. Tipping points stands for the crossing of which triggers unpredictable, far-reaching changes in the global climate system. Such tipping points are, for example, methane emissions from thawing permafrost or from the bottom of the oceans, changes in the oceanic circulation in the North Atlantic, or the melting of the sea ice and glaciers with the associated decrease in albedo. Their influence on climate change are still unclear, which is why precise capacity limits cannot be formulated. For this reason, it is important to act immediately, because there is a real danger of just passing or already having passed such tipping points. Moreover, many facts indicate that market-based solutions, like pricing environmental damage into production or trading emission rights, have failed so far. The so hoped-for steering function through market pricing has failed. Worldwide, we are experiencing a global increase in environmentally damaging consumption patterns. Air travel is increasing, meat consumption is growing, and the exploitation and burning of fossil energy resources is growing until the deposits are exhausted. The formulation of social goals in sustainable development is very vague. It emphasizes the importance of social security systems, but what is the global reality? Minimum standards such as living wages, secure employment contracts, health and pension insurance, or sufficient labor protection are an unattainable goal for many workers. Since the supply chain for the individual parts of our computers or t-shirts run across the entire globe, it is rather the rule that minimum social standards are not observed in their production. We now know the most serious flaws in the prevailing sustainability model. But where do they come from? In order to understand why the three-pillar concept does not seem to be a suitable way of depicting realistic sustainability development, we need to briefly recall von Karlowitz's manifesto from our last lecture. As we already know, the concept of sustainability first appeared in a purely economic context. Only later were other dimensions, such as the social factor, added to the term. The idea of social sustainability in the sense of social justice and moral thinking was not an assumption in the original sustainability model. In the last lecture, we briefly touched on the Brundtland report. As the publication of this report represents one of the most important milestones in the sustainability movement, in the next few minutes, we will look in more detail at the statements it contains and their implications, starting with an often cited definition of sustainability. Sustainable development is development that meets the needs of the present generation without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. This definition is one of the most frequently cited references when we look at the concept of sustainability. Dear participants, read the definition again. Which facts are described, and can a definition of the term sustainability actually be derived from the statement? Let's have a first look at that. To better represent the controversy on the sustainability definition aspect, we will look at selected opinions from academia below. Of course, these opinions are only excerpts from a variety of expert opinions, and participants are encouraged to engage in more detailed self-study of the definition critique if interested. The first opinion deals with the subject of preservation, that is, the actual thing that needs protection in the definition. Here it is emphasized that it is the capabilities or possibilities for enabling future generation that must be ensured. The minimum possibilities should correspond to the present abilities. The World Commission on Environment and Development has also addressed the definition. This excerpt is primarily about the constant change that is emphasized by the term development. Human and natural resources should be used in such a way that both present and future needs can be met. On this slide, we see two more angles on the definition. The first statement underlines the difficulty of capturing multi-dimensionality. Since sustainability requires that different factors be considered simultaneously, the phenomenon must be broken down into different factors, or, in this case, dimensions, in order to make practical implementation measurable. The last statement is admittedly also the most critical voice. Here, the emotional significance of the intergenerational relationship is brought into focus. The deliberately vague wording makes it possible to reach the broadest target group possible. Based on the excerpts shown, what can be said about the use of the Brundtland definition? The core message of the Brundtland report comprises three major areas. With its statement, it automatically lists certain implications, like the dangerous use of non-renewable energy. It also highlights the common understanding that economic growth leads to prosperity. And lastly, the pollution caused by a growing population must not exceed certain trigger points, since future generations would be worse off otherwise. But the Brundtland report does not have just one statement to offer, even though not much else is usually written about it. In the following, we will take a closer look at three different points of criticism in order to better put the key statements of the report into context. First, we should start with the target audience of the report. Who was the actual audience at the time of publication? Critics of the Brundtland report repeatedly state that the educated and interested public, as well as experts from academia from the relevant research niches, would be the only addressees. However, this deduction is incorrect if one considers the way the report summarizes the key messages. The lack of a single correct solution and the interdisciplinary challenges are emphasized several times. The deliberately broad approach to solutions allows a wide range of readers to connect their own prior knowledge with the report's findings. The next point of criticism is all about the mention of capabilities. Opponents question to what extent the moral concepts of future generations will correspond to those of today's society. Specifically, they question whether society will be as concerned about sustainable development in the future as we do. Why do we need to ensure capabilities today if it might be irrelevant for future generations? This criticism can be countered with the fact that it is not a matter of absolute but relative capabilities. Since we do not know today in which direction society will want to develop in the future, it is our moral duty to ensure that sufficient capabilities, including human and natural resources, are available in the future so that the coming generation can take care of its own affairs freely and independently. The way we live today must not limit the possibilities of the future. That is why the orientation towards the concept of capacity is so crucial, because it represents precisely this uncertainty. Last but not least, we want to deal with the criticism of superficial problem solving. We have already dealt with this aspect in this lecture. The statement that there is no concrete definition of sustainable development makes it difficult to determine an exact measurable value for the degree of sustainable development already achieved. The lack of one or more concrete targets makes the concept seem spongy and prevents proper implementation in practice. The critics correctly point out that the definition is extremely vague. However, critics at this point underestimate the aspect of phase orientation, which is explicitly mentioned in the report. In this context, a series of successive temporal steps leads to overall societal prosperity from economic growth. Each individual phase must be defined by society itself. Regional differences must also be considered. The water can principle will not lead to a permanently satisfactory result. The key messages reflect some scientific trends too. First of all, development no longer seems to be the main topic of economists exclusively. Secondly, economists alone are no longer responsible for economic diagnoses. Thirdly, the three components, environment, economy, and the society, can define the status of sustainability, but they don't have to be the only factors to be considered. In the first part of this lecture, we have dealt in detail with the criticism of the previous understanding of sustainability. Now, we want to look at possible solutions. But first of all, let's briefly review what we already know. At the moment, political guidelines are mainly aimed at fulfilling certain criteria or not exceeding predefined limited values. Meeting these criteria is equated with a positive increase in sustainable development. It applies sustainable development as an end in itself. However, this development of an end in itself leads to a lack of orientation within sustainable development. Why are certain specifications made? Who determines them? Who are they controlled by? We have all at one time or another questioned whether certain sustainable requirements are actually useful to the cause or merely serve to fulfill bizarre specifications according to the rule, at least we are doing something. Consequently, the question can be derived, what purpose does sustainable development serve? Is it really the end in itself? If we take the Brundtland definition as a guide, it turns out that the overriding goal is not sustainable development, but the prosperity of future generations. In Brundtland's definition, sustainability does not fulfill an end in itself, but is a mean to an end. The connection can be well understood from the illustration below. If we now understand sustainable development in a goal-oriented context, it becomes clear what misinterpretation the concept of sustainability has experienced in recent decades. In turn, further questions can be derived from this finding. The most important question should be, how exactly does one resolve the understanding of self-purpose? Which factors need to be redefined in order to establish sustainable development as a mean to an end? Since we are well aware of the weaknesses of the sustainability model from the first part of this lecture, a first work package is the redefinition of a sustainability model. We know that looking at the individual dimensions in isolation is not a target-oriented strategy. We are also aware of the interdependencies between dimensions. Furthermore, we have to deal with the formulation of an overarching goal, a vision of prosperity from which we can derive the metrics of the new sustainability concept in a targeted manner. In the conception of a prosperity vision, it is much more difficult to offer a solution approach. It must be emphasized here that it is up to each society itself to decide which vision applies to it. The direct influence of all social strata is essential and decisive for a realistic formulation. Of course, the distribution of freedoms and restrictions must be taken into account as a matter of priority. Which freedoms must be curtailed today so that future generations do not experience any disadvantage in their chosen lifestyle? At the end of this lecture, we would like to show the relationship between sustainable development and the finance sector. This part is the bridge to the next two modules, which deal in detail with the topic of sustainable financial strategies. In short, the relationship can be summarized as follows. Financial flows represent the link between a current commitment and future implementation and achievement. Any kind of financial investment represents a commitment strategy. In recent years, it has become clear that society is demanding a commitment away from conventional investments and giving greater weight to sustainable financial options. Today, the society wants to actively make a commitment to future sustainable investments. This results in several development potentials for the financial players. For example, product portfolios need to be revised and investment strategies reconsidered. Target groups are changing and more retail investment is available for sustainable investments. The challenges in investment design based on an overarching vision of prosperity is one of the biggest challenges facing the financial world in the coming years. Dear participants, well done! You managed to get through the first part of the first module. So now, let's recap what we covered in this chapter. You are able to outline the critical arguments against the three-pillar model. Moreover, you are able to discuss the understanding of the term sustainable development, and you are able to discuss the inferences of the Brundtland report. And finally, you are also able to explain the relationship between sustainability and finance and the importance for our future.